I'm Mary Madden, Director of the Museum and Education Division for the Kansas Historical Society. Thank you for joining us for our monthly virtual Museum After Hours program coming to you from the Kansas Museum of History, which I'm very pleased to announce is open. We reopened on June 4th. We are so happy to finally have visitors back in our gallery. Please note that the hours have changed for the summer. Our new hours are 10 to 4, Wednesday through Saturday. As always, tonight's program will be followed by a question and answer period with our presenter. Please use the Q&A link at the bottom of the screen to post your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. Tonight, we are joined by Prisca Barnes, a dedicated community leader and a proud native of Wichita, Kansas. She has devoted her life to advancing her community through service in the religious and civic organizations, which includes serving as the former director of the Kansas African American Museum in Wichita. Prisca founded Storytime Village, Inc. in 2009. It is a nonprofit organization to help underserved children thrive through partnerships that provide early childhood development and family engagement around reading and access to books. Prisca is especially dedicated to improving the disparities in reading proficiency rates that exist by race and income in Kansas. She took her passion and became an author herself. In 2020, she published a children's book, People, Pride, and Promise, the story of the Dockum sit-in, which is the topic of tonight's program. The Dockum Drugstore sit-in was the first successful student-led lunch counter protest, happening 2 years before the perhaps better known Woolworth's lunch counter protest in Greensboro, North Carolina. Ms. Barnes will discuss the details of the Dockum sit-in, explore how these protests help transform the struggle for racial equality in America, and consider contemporary nonviolent protests. So please join me in welcoming Chriska Barnes.
Hello, thank you for having me. I am so pleased and honored to be able to join with the Kansas Historical Society.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to get off screen and let you take over and share your PowerPoint.
Okay, well, thank you so much. All right. So again, I want to thank the Kansas Historical Society for the invitation to be here on this evening. I count it a great privilege to be before you and to have this discussion about the Dockum sit-in. Before I begin, you heard just a little bit about me, but I do want to give you a little bit more, dive a little bit deeper into who's talking to you tonight. So this image here you see before me, if you look down below, that's me with the smirk on my face, and above me are my two brothers, Caleb and Jesse, and my mother, a retired school teacher. My father, God rest his soul, he was a pastor, and so he raised us with a servant's heart, right? I am a Wichitan, a product of public schools. I left Wichita to attend Clark Atlanta University, a historically Black college in Atlanta, Georgia. And I returned back to Wichita, Kansas to obtain my master's at Wichita State. And I guess I have the education bug. Something caused me to go back to school during a pandemic. So I'm back at Wichita State getting my doctorate. But I had an interesting journey in the nonprofit world directly after obtaining my master's at Wichita State. I served, as stated before, as the executive director of the Kansas African American Museum in Wichita, and then I founded Storytime Village, a literacy nonprofit with a mission to inspire a lifelong love of reading for underserved Kansas children from birth to age 8. I get the question a lot, why are you, this literacy director, nonprofit director, concerned about or sharing the story of the Dockum sit-in? Well, I served as the advisor for the Wichita NAACP Youth Council, which is the same youth council that conducted the historic 1958 lunch counter sit-in. And one of the things that I learned when I was the advisor for this youth council was that many of the children that participated in the youth council knew little or nothing about the Dockum sit-in. And then I learned that it wasn't just the children, but so many in the community knew little or nothing about the Dockum sit-in. And so it became a personal mission to share the Dockum story, and I worked through my literacy nonprofit to make that a reality. 2018 marked the 60th anniversary of the Dockum sit-in, and with the support of Humanities Kansas, the People, Pride, and Promise Project was born. And that project includes a documentary and pre-COVID, a traveling exhibition that traveled throughout the state to public libraries, and a recently published children's book about the Dockum sit-in, and carries that same name, the People, Pride, and Promise name. Today, 63 years after the Dockum sit-in, you can still see the impact that the sit-in has made, and you can still see that youth are making their voices heard in contemporary nonviolent protests that are making history. It is my goal to help make sure that the Dockum sit-in story is heard all across Wichita, the state of Kansas, the nation, and even abroad. And I want to share this story so we can know more about how these participants stood on courage, persistence, and careful planning to give the civil rights movement one of its greatest weapons in the struggle for equal accommodation. So this evening, I'm excited to dive deep into the Dockum story, and I want to start our conversation with an image. It is said that an image or a picture is worth 1,000 words. And we all know, or if you don't know, hopefully by the end of this presentation, you will be more aware of how powerful and vital the role that imagery played in shaping the racial and social justice movement. An image can declare to the world that the high courts have banned segregation in public schools. It can show the heartbreak of a mother whose son was lynched for allegedly whistling at a white woman. An image can display the determination of a woman who dared to challenge the transportation laws in our country. Imagery fueled the civil rights movement. And today, images are telling stories and compelling people to action. But what if there were no cameras to capture the fight for equality? What if there were no news stations to cover the story on the evening news? What if there was just one small newspaper that took one picture? The story could easily get lost, and the contribution could somehow be diminished. A now grainy image of the Dockum sit-in participants captured by a local African-American newspaper is the only image captured and preserved from the sit-in. And that is why I want to paint a picture for you that will bring new life to the Dockum sit-in story and help you to see how a group of young people changed our nation. The 1950s was a time of great conflict. Racism was rampant in many parts of the country, especially in the South, and the civil rights movement was exposing the divisions in American society in the South and throughout the nation. And while there were many significant acts that took place outside of the South to help move the civil rights movement forward, most simply are not familiar with the fight for civil rights in places outside of the South, with the exception of the Topeka, Kansas 1954 landmark Brown v. Board of Education Supreme Court case, which ruled unanimously that racial segregation of children in public schools nationwide was unconstitutional. However, In 1958, another courageous act took place in the heart of the nation, and that was the Dockum sit-in. I want you to take a look at this image here. You'll see in the light-colored suit, young Ron Walters. He was a college student. He was the president of the NAACP Youth Council. Next to him was a representative from the National NAACP. And next to him was Ron's cousin, Carol Parks Hahn, and she was the vice president of the Youth Council. And then next to her, with a big smile on her face, was someone that I really look up to, and her name is Rosie Hughes, and she was the youth advisor. And I actually got to stand in that role and be a youth advisor for this youth council. But there was nothing that would stand in the way of this determined group of NAACP students. Segregation wouldn't stand in their way, and like many places in the nation, Wichita, Kansas was segregated. Now, across the nation, colored-only water fountains and bathrooms were the norm in our country, but in Wichita, they had their own segregation issues. One being that Black children and white children weren't allowed to swim in the same pools together. But that wouldn't stop them, this determined group of young people. That would not stop them. The fact that they were attempting to change rules that had never been changed before wouldn't stop them. Fear would not stop them. Threats would not stop them. They were on a mission, and they would not stop until they were successful. Now, I shared with you earlier that a documentary was a part of this project, and as I share the story across the state, I like to share clips from this documentary. So throughout this presentation, you will be able to see clips that help illuminate the story. So take a look.
The Dockum sit-in. On July 19, 1958, a group of Wichita, Kansas NAACP Youth Council members filled the stools at the Dockum Drugstore lunch counter to protest the store's discriminatory practices. A Kansas law created in 1874 prohibited unequal service in public places. However, restaurants in downtown Wichita still did not equally serve Black patrons. The Dockum Drugstore was one of the most popular eating establishments downtown. They also had a reputation for discrimination. The Youth Council knew that if change could happen at Dockum, change could happen anywhere. For 3 trying weeks, the students sat with patience, waiting to rightfully be served. Through their unwavering persistence, the Wichita NAACP Youth Council conducted America's first student-led lunch counter sit-in. Their story is one of hope, faith, struggle, and triumph. This is the story of the Dockum sit-in.
We honor these young people because they conducted their courageous struggle against segregation. Those were the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at the 50th anniversary of the National NAACP Convention when he recognized the 1958 Wichita Youth Council for their successful Dockum lunch counter sit-in. The Dockum sit-in was America's first successful student-led lunch counter sit-in and was led by the Wichita NAACP Youth Council, a group of mostly high school and college students. The Wichita Youth Council's bold and courageous acts were a testament to the many children, teenagers, and young adults across the nation who participated in meetings and marches as forces of change during the civil rights movement. And when I think of these courageous youth and their fight for equality, 4 themes come to mind: hope, faith, struggle, and triumph. We're going to explore those themes tonight, and we're going to begin with hope. Dr. Martin Luther King once stated, "Only in darkness can you see the stars." So I have a question for you. What does hope look like? Can you describe it? Not the dictionary definition, but something tangible. Think in your mind how you would describe hope. And while you're thinking about it, I'm going to share with you this image. If I were to describe hope as a person, I'd say hope looks like a bright and determined college student named Ron Walters. Walters was a 20-year-old college student when he organized the Dockum sit-in 1958. He was bursting with expectation for change, and while away at Fisk University, a historically Black college in Nashville, Tennessee, he was inspired to do something to change the unfair treatment of people in his own community, and that's what he set out to do the summer of 1958. Ron was from Wichita, and the way Wichita in 1958 was described to me was an exciting place to be, especially downtown. There were lots of busy shops and restaurants, and many African Americans worked downtown. And during Ron's summer break from college, that is exactly where he chose to work. Here's a little bit more of a description of Mr. Ron Walters.
NAACP national figures would come to town. Ron got the idea that this may be something we should do here, because it was obvious he had experience, I had experience, because we had worked downtown.
At Dr. Walters' core was really one idea. And I don't know where that idea came from, whether it was his family, whether it was the environment he was nurtured and raised in here in Wichita. I don't know where it came from. But the core of Ron Walters can be narrowed down to one basic idea. What does this have to do with the liberation of Black people?
We were Blacks, and Wichita was alive and well in terms of racism and segregation. They didn't mind Black folks sweeping floors, cleaning toilet stools, taking care of white babies, but there were limitations.
Working downtown, as you can imagine, didn't turn out to be what Ron expected. Blacks were not allowed to sit and eat at the lunch counters because lunch counters were reserved for whites only. Ron and his friends would have to take their food to go from the back. And it was clear to Ron that if something was going to be done about the segregation issue in Wichita, it had to begin downtown. And what better place than one of the most popular eating establishments in Wichita, the Dockum Drugstore. Now, the Dockum Drugstore was not just popular. It was a part of the National Rexall chain of drugstores, and that was the largest chain in Kansas. And it also had, as you heard earlier in one of the video clips, that it had one of the worst reputations of discrimination. Ron was certain that if change could happen at Dockum, change could happen throughout the community. Now, to give you a little bit more information about Mr. Ron Walters, the living members of the Dockum sit-in described Mr. Walters as a born leader. They said he even dressed the part, carrying a briefcase and wearing a necktie when he was a young boy. And he was always ready to conduct business. So it wasn't a surprise when he took on the role as president of the Youth Council for the Wichita NAACP, and his cousin Carol Parks joined him as vice president. Carol's family would host many of the prominent civil rights leaders in their Wichita home, including the mother of Emmett Till, the young boy who was lynched in Mississippi and sparked nationwide outrage. The two cousins proposed to the Youth Council their idea to host a sit-in at the Dockum Drugstore. And it didn't take much convincing because the youth in the council had already participated in protests of stores and restaurants that did not provide equal service to people of color. And they were fed up with being treated unfairly, and they were ready to take action. All throughout the 1950s, the civil rights movement was building momentum, and the Wichita Youth Council was compelled to join the young people across the nation that were making bold and courageous stands against inequality. They were fueled by Emmett Till's lynching and the Montgomery bus boycott that occurred just a few short years earlier. And they were also inspired by the courage of the Little Rock Nine, a group of students who desegregated the Little Rock High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. And it was clear that the young people of the civil rights movement wanted change and would even face violence, and in some cases, even jail to get it. Many children, teenagers, and young adults across the nation were doing their part to end unfair practices. Fighting for equality was nothing new in Wichita, and we'll learn just a little bit more about it.
Boys and girls,
Good afternoon, Mr. Vesey.
we had no idea, some in high school, some in college, that the effort that we undertook was going to be so successful.
Were you scared?
You know, that's a good question. Some things had happened in the nation. In 1955, there was a young black male named Emmett Till who had gone from Chicago to Mississippi to visit his relatives. And he had a lot of cousins there, and he wanted to show them how much he was not a friend, he was a man. Emmett may have made a mistake, though, and that cost him his life. He was accused of whistling at the white store on his wife. He was really killed very cruelly. You wouldn't have been able to know who he was by virtue of the way his face looked. And his mother wanted him to be left that way when he was put in the casket because she wanted the world to know what Ugly had done to her son.
Why did you want to go to the downtown drugstore?
Good question. Dockum was part of a chain. For the most part, blacks were not welcome in eating places unless they carried their food out. You know, it took over a year for our planning, and we did some rehearsal so we'd know what to expect. And we had a little fun with that, but we were treating each other cruel because we had a feeling that that's what we were going to have to expect, that they weren't going to roll out a carpet and say, you black folks are welcome. One of the things that the adults in the NAACP wanted to do with black children, primarily in Wichita, was to come up with an activity whereby we were striving for some level of justice that we weren't able to appreciate and to experience at that time. Example, blacks, for the most part, could not sit down at the lunch counters and eat.
I want to share a little bit more about the gentleman that you're hearing a lot from in these video clips, Dr. Galen Vesey. He was one of the Dockum sit-in participants, and I had the wonderful privilege of traveling the state with him during the inaugural year of this project, and he served as a humanities scholar for the People, Pride, and Promise Project, and I gleaned so much from him and learned so much about what was going on during that time and what was going on even in the minds of these young people as they were preparing for this sit-in. So wanted you to be aware of who you were listening to as we show these video clips. I stated before that fighting for equality was nothing new to blacks in Wichita. And that was especially true for a man named Chester I. Lewis Jr. He was a well-known lawyer in the community. And in the 1950s, Wichita was considered one of the most segregated communities in the state of Kansas. And Lewis was the president of the adult branch of the Wichita NAACP, and he was known for fighting against discriminatory practices in the city. I was told that Mr. Lewis was proud, he was strong, and he was not afraid to fight for what was right. They say that when Chester set out to make a change happened. When Blacks couldn't swim in whites-only pools in Wichita, guess what? Chester changed that. And when aircraft companies in the town were segregated, Chester changed that. His determination inspired the youth council, and he gave them his blessing to move forward with the sit-in. Chester mentored the youth and gave them hope. Remember that theme? Hope that they could be successful in their sit-in. And the Dockum sit-in is a story of hope, but it is also a story of faith. Scripture says that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And the NAACP Youth Council was stepping out on the faith that they were going to see a change that no one in their community had ever seen before. And with the help of their youth advisor, Rosie Hughes, the Youth Council began preparing for the sit-in in the spring of 1958. They spent months preparing and training. The students trained by role-playing in the basement of St. Peter Claver Church, and Ron Walters was convinced that their work in the church basement would help to prepare them for the unknown while sitting in the stools at the lunch counter. And what would they encounter? They would soon find out. A sit-in officially began at 10 a.m. on July 19, 1958. The students took turns filling the lunch counter stools, and just as they expected, they were refused service. However, the youth were determined, and they intended to stay at their posts until they were served. But the manager was not pleased and would rather close the fountain than serve the Black students. And a sign was placed on the counter stating this fountain temporarily closed. Didn't show this image, but this is an illustration from the People, Pride, and Promise children's book. And as you look through this presentation, you'll see illustrations. Those are from the book. This is an illustration of St. Peter Claver Church, where the Dockum sit-in participants trained in the basement. We'll hear a little bit about this, the faith that they had from Dr. Vesey again.
We were fortunate enough because we had members who were part of the church family here to be given permission to do some role playing downstairs, which was a small but important part of what we were trying to accomplish.
Let's move on to the theme of struggle. This is one of my heroes, Frederick Douglass. He stated, "If there is no struggle, there is no progress." And we know that Frederick Douglass was a great abolitionist leader, an author, an orator, and a statesman. And so that is a really inspirational quote. 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, the students sat with patience, waiting to rightfully be served. And for those nearly 3 weeks, the Youth Council endured threats, scare tactics, and a continual denial of service at the Dockum Drugstore. And one day in particular, give me 1 second to get some water. Sorry about that. One day in particular, while the Youth Council were sitting at the lunch counter, a small group of white youth came to the store to start a fight with the participants. They were trying to disrupt the sit-in. The police were quickly called, and while the gang left, The next day, or 2 days later, a larger gang came back. And this time, however, when the police were called, they refused to step in and help the youth council. So Ron called on help from Chester I. Lewis. Now remember, I said that Chester Lewis was not afraid to fight for what was right. And Chester and a group of neighborhood boys came by the carloads to their aid, and they scared off the bullies. But this incident shook up the youth council, who were starting to get weary and seeing no progress in changing the policies at the Dockum Drugstore. The sit-in participants may have been getting weary, but they didn't realize that another thing, triumph, was on the way. I do believe I have a clip about triumph.
We want to have them with the same respect and dignity as white citizens to be served at the counter.
We still have to go back in time and think about the fact that this was a time when restroom facilities were segregated, when folks were still riding at the back of the bus, when there were multiple classes on the train, you know, if you were going from one place to the other. And just think about how deeply ingrained racism and segregation was all over the country.
That was not quite a clip about triumph, but it is explaining a little bit more detail about what was going on during that time. So triumph, this is one of my favorite quotes from Ghanaian author Leila Gifty Akita. She says, if you stay determined, the obstacles cannot stop your progress. You will triumph over every mountain. Now, I'm the daughter of a pastor, and as I showed before, that image of my father. And so I've been rooted in the traditions of the Black church. And I can just imagine what Sundays were like in 1958 in Wichita. I was told that Sundays were special. This was the day that everyone dressed to impress. Like, ladies wore lovely hats and pretty dresses, and the young men wore neckties and their finest suits. And on this Sunday, I could imagine Ron picking out an extra special necktie because Chester Lewis had called a mass community meeting at New Hope Baptist Church, and everyone was going to be there to support and encourage the Dockum participants. Now, Dr. Martin Luther King always recognized the power of music as an instrument of change. And I'm sure on this Sunday, there were songs being sung to encourage the youth, songs like, ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, turn me round, turn me round, ain't gonna let nobody turn me round, I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. The next day, August 11th, 1958, with a new freedom-fighting, protesting courage, one by one, the youth began filling the lunch counter stools at the Dockum Drugstore, and suddenly, the door to the Dockum Drugstore opened, and standing in the doorway, and I could just imagine with the sun to his back, was Mr. Dockum himself, the store's owner. He walked into the store and he stated, "Serve them. I'm losing too much money." Those words ended the sit-in. The lunch counter at the Dockum Drugstore was no longer whites only and was now open to everyone in Kansas and eventually all Rexall stores in cities all across the nation, large and small. And today, 63 years after the Dockum sit-in, you can still see the impact that the sit-in has made. Youth are still making their voices heard in contemporary, nonviolent protests that are making history. take a look.
What I think young people can learn from the 1958 NAACP Youth Council is that it really takes courage to do the right thing. It takes courage to speak up when you see an injustice taking place. And what they can learn is that we want them to be empowered to do the right thing anytime they see injustice anywhere.
Understanding that just them doing a simple, just simply sitting in there and hoping for the best actually changed everything.
As quietly as we began. After 3 weeks, 4 weeks, it was over.
We're talking about a dozen, 2 dozen people over the course of the couple days, right? And yet managed to transform not just that one little business, not just the block around it, but the entire city and the entire country, inspiring the sort of later actions that happen in other parts of the country.
Knowing that you are a part of this bigger humanity, that you can contribute and also you can withdraw from. And so that these children in this climate where sometimes it seems like we're far from it, we know that the triumph is there. We know that we have a past and shoulders to stand where we can lift those babies up and let them peer into the future and see their place and see how they can continue to grow and make a difference.
Today, the youth are at the forefront of the nonviolent civil rights movement.
Show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
As president of the Wichita NAACP Youth Council, I look up to Ron Walters. He organized the Dockum sit-in, and that to me means a lot because as the president, I have the role of leadership.
The Dockum sit-in is a great example of just how powerful these sort of small groups of dedicated people can be.
I mean, if somebody's not going to give you the power to do something, then you just empower yourself. You don't have to sit around and wait for permission. You don't wait on a yes. You don't wait on a no. You don't wait at all. Well, I saw opportunity to really give some people that didn't think they had a voice to get them opportunity to speak out. But around the United States, there was a lot of things that were going on. In Ferguson, you had they were setting the city on fire and things of that nature. I wanted to try to bring some of that here, but just without tearing our city apart, because when you do demonstrations like that, the whole focus is to really build it up. But you saw when they were doing some of those demonstrations that a lot of cities were getting burned down, their neighborhoods, and it was really the neighborhoods of the people that were really trying to say something. They were tearing their own neighborhoods down. So what I wanted to do is try to just bring that here in a fashion that can give us a platform to express ourselves, but just kind of minimize all the damage that was being done to the communities.
Every single successful movement that you see in this country starts that same way, with a couple of usually young people, young people who are grounded in and rooted in the experience of their elders who advise them and guide them through the process, right? They don't just do this all by themselves. There are usually wise older folks around them to help steer them without taking the leadership away from the young people. Starts with that small group, and then they manage to succeed.
At the end of the day, I'm trying to do the same thing that those people at the Dockum sit-in were doing, and is just say some things that are not easy to say in the way that's not easy to say them. We have to include ourselves, because time after time after time, we're looking at this picture that we know we're supposed to be in, but we can't find ourselves. So now this is our time to put ourselves in the picture, like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. did, Malcolm X, Huey P. Newton, the Dockum sit-in. They put themselves in the picture that they know where they're supposed to be in, but they can never find themselves. So I just told everybody, this is our time to put ourselves in the picture.
The young lady that you see here where the video stopped, she is the illustrator. Her name is Priscilla Brown, and she's the illustrator of the People, Pride, and Promise children's book. And in the documentary, she goes into a little bit more detail on why she chose some of the imagery, and colors and things of that nature. But putting ourselves into the picture, I said that was a quote that we expanded upon and created some projects around, actually. I want to leave you with this. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in his autobiography that courage is an inner resolution to go forward despite obstacles. And that pretty much sums up the story of the Dockum sit-in. This is a story of hope, faith, struggle, and triumph. And with courage and endurance, this story inspires us all. And now that you know the story of the Dockum sit-in, the sit-in that took place right in the heart of the nation, I encourage you to share it with others so that we can continue to inspire generations with the story of a people with pride and promise. And the story will no longer be limited to that one grainy image, but together we will continue to tell the story and paint a vivid picture for the entire world to see. If you want to learn more, you can visit our website, Storytime Village website, to learn more about the project, the children's book, and I'd love to answer questions now about today's topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prisca. That was really impressive. I'm so glad that you took the time to develop this story, to share it with old people, young people, but especially the young people, because as I found, a lot of people don't like history until they get old. And they need to learn history when they're young. There's so many lessons we can learn. And like the last activist said, AJ Bohannon, is following in the footsteps of the Dockum sit-in protesters, and in the steps of Martin Luther King too. You can implement change. There's different ways to do it. Some are more successful than others, but it seems like peaceful protest at least seems to work, hopefully more time than not. So we do have some questions for you. We have a big thank you from a viewer, a longtime viewer, who said, thank you for the inspiring presentation and thank you for sharing some biblical scripture too. I'm going to add, love the singing.
Oh, okay. I was hoping I could get a note out because you saw I probably should have drank a little water before I started speaking. So I apologize to everyone for losing my voice in the middle of talking. So, but thank you for bearing with me.
Was that a mandatory skill for being the daughter of a pastor?
You get voluntold for a lot of things when you're the daughter of a pastor.
I think the world's glad my father wasn't a pastor. I can't put two notes together. Another question, what about the role of Reverend Brown, a 14-year-old Native American who stood outside? I'm not sure what that means.
If he was a part of the Dockum sit-in, I have not uncovered that information. And if there's information that you have, I'm always excited to learn new. So if you were to travel, so when Dr. Galen Vesey, the humanities scholar that was a participant in the Dockum sit-in, would travel with me, he would speak and I would sit and just glean. And he talked about the complexities, and those consisted of, we always see the outward, this was a group of African-American students that participated, but he wanted you to understand that we had allies. We had white students from Wichita State that would come and participate as well. And that is always a part of when you look at the successful civil rights movement activities and protests, you would see a unified force. It was not just one group of people doing the work alone. It was, the greater community coming together. Now, granted, those that are greater, that had the greater impact, would, be predominantly that group that would, be kind of visible and standing out. But it was always, that the help from the allies was always welcomed and a part of the success of the movement.
That raises the question about, I would assume that the African-American students face the greatest risk. But what about the white students who sat as allies? Did they face the same harassment? And
that is something that I, just listening to Dr. Vesey, he doesn't go into great detail about, how those participants, the allies, were treated. He mainly speaks about the inclusion of them in the story. But I do know how, so the sit-in participants spoke about, on the other side of the counter were students that they went to school with, and it was difficult for them. And they would say, "You're going to get me in trouble. Why are you doing this?" Or the first person to begin the sit-in, if you look in that picture that we had, Carol Parks Hahn, very fair skin, and she sat down at the lunch counter, ordered a Coke, and the waitress didn't recognize that she was African American at first, until here come the other participants to fill up the lunch counter, and she realized this is different. And then she looked at her again and asked her the question. She said, "You're not colored, are you, honey?" And she responded affirmatively, "I am." And that's when the sit-in began, right, honey, but she began, that's where the sit-in began. And it was her not being visibly African American at the very beginning. So I don't know how, and if you look at that grainy image, you'll see that it's not just African American students. They were making Mr. Dockum lose money because they were filling up the seats. And when you fill up the seats, you don't have people sitting in there buying things. And you might not have people coming in because these students were causing a ruckus, a quiet ruckus. They weren't loud, but it was, they were disrupting the system. And so, I'm not going to go there right now. It's something I don't want to be a part of, or I can't get a seat. I'm going to go down the street because there's another, lunch counter that I can get something. And so they were making them lose money. But you can see in those seats, there were not just African American students at that first day.
how many, and this is a question from a viewer, how many students total took part, and were they there from like when it opened till it closed, and did they have shifts or?
So the number varies. When we did the 60th anniversary, so that the NAACP did a lot of research to collect the names of all the participants, and there seems to be new names that come up. And I think one of the problems that we had is these young people didn't talk about what they accomplished.
Yeah.
They were quiet about it. They did the work. They accomplished their goal. They were recognized by Dr. Martin Luther King, but they did not boast about their accomplishment. They wanted to accomplish this goal. They wanted to be served at the lunch counter, and they got that, and they kept moving. Dr. Vesey's father died and didn't know that he participated in it. It was just during 2020, we were our city was put on the spotlight by one of our own, who is a news reporter for, she is an anchor for the Today Show, Chanel Jones.
Yeah.
Saw that. Well, she went to church with many of these people and didn't know that she was sitting next to these people who changed the nation. They didn't talk about it. They had to really, so when, then if you moved away, or and you're not speaking about this, the story is untold, and it was not captured. There was no pictures, but that one image. And so it is, and not unlikely that you're going to have more people come out and say, oh, I participated in that as well. Or, so we have a number, off the top of my head, I don't want to give you the wrong number, but we do have a set group of folks that we know were participants, but that number is not exact. The way they went about they had certain days and they had certain times, and they took shifts, and the shift was to, when you came, you knew it was your time to fill the lunch counter seat and to keep that seat filled for your shift. And so if you keep that going, that keep the momentum in there, and you can keep those seats filled, not necessarily for the entire day, but for enough time that it would make an impact. And for the 3 weeks, it definitely makes an impact.
Well, and it would be so stressful to sit there because, like you said, those bullies came in, and I'm sure they thought every minute they were sitting there that you don't know what's coming in the door and how they're going to react. And
imagine looking around. So they were compelled by, the acts that were happening throughout the nation. But just imagine how scary those things were when you're looking at what happened in Arkansas, and when you were looking at the lynchings, and you were looking at Emmett Till and all. When you see that could be quite frightening. They did not know what would happen because this was something that had never been, had not been done successfully.
Yeah.
It was, so what Dr. Vesey stated even in the video, that they were really cruel to each other because they didn't know what to expect. They wanted to be prepared. And so they came in prepared for, and they even talked about, I didn't have that in one of the clips, but Dr. Vesey says that on one of the occasions, a police officer did come in. He did not engage them, but he had his club and he kept hitting his hand with it just to intimidate them. But they were told to stay away from this. The newspapers were told, and this is the stories that were shared with me, that everyone was told, stay away from this because they'll go away. Don't give them any attention because this will brush over. And it didn't.
Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Well, I better move on here. I've got some more questions.
Sorry, I'm just going.
No, but including like significant story. Thank you for bringing it to us. Thank you so much. I first heard about the Dockum sit-in on the Today Show.
On the Today Show.
I'm so happy to hear it told here in such an intriguing and inspiring way. And then, is the Dockum Drugstore building still standing?
The building itself still exists. It's on Douglas in Wichita, but it is now the Ambassador Hotel. There is no real resemblance of the Dockum Drugstore there. They do have inside in the lower level the Dockum speakeasy, and then they have a little area that kind of has some images of the Dockum. They are in the process working with the Kansas African American Museum to create a monument in that on the site, and then about a rock's throw away is being renovated at the current moment. but it's the Chester I. Lewis Reflection Square. And there was a bronze sit-in, kind of it was a sculpture, and there's debate on whether it is or is not the Dockum sit-in, but that was a place that people would go to recognize and remember the Dockum sit-in, especially because it was in the Chester I. Lewis Reflection Square.
I've heard that none of the stools, lunch counter, anything exists.
Didn't find anything.
And you have the one grainy photo. And as a museum person, it just breaks my heart because how powerful it would be to have those actual pieces, because it brings history to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just about, when I was executive director of the Kansas African American Museum, we scoured, we looked everywhere. But that is one of the reasons why, you know, it is not anything authentic, but we have, when we travel the exhibition, there is where you can sit down at the lunch counter, and kind of give that resemblance, just so that you can remember what happened. And we
reflect, honor, experience. Ms. Barnes, I learned about the Dockum sit-in from a participant who went on to become the longest standing NAACP branch president in NAACP history, Mr. Darrell Pope of Hutchinson, Kansas, where Chester Lewis is from. It is another testament to the lasting compact of the sit-in, and we would love to have you come to Hutch to inspire us.
I would love to come to Hutchinson.
Okay.
Done deal.
And
Mr.
listening,
Pope is
they're
awesome.
going to hold you to it.
Mr. Pope is awesome too.
Another question, were only Blacks banned from the counter, or were all people of color, like Latinos, Asian, other?
That is a great question. And I would imagine that all people of color were banned from the lunch counter. It was whites only. I don't see any exceptions being made, but that's something that I need to go back and be sure of. But when, I mean, the counter was whites only, that was it. So, yeah.
Could you show again the URL for the history of the sit-in events?
For more information about the People, Pride, and Promise Project? Okay.
You can post it in the chat.
Yeah.
And people can pick it up there.
Okay. It's just on the website. I'm going to put it right here.
That'll give me time to sneak through this other question.
Okay.
I started kindergarten in Topeka just weeks after the Brown v. Board decision. I didn't realize until I was nearly grown before realizing how early I entered into the situation. I made Black friends in those early years and have always felt strongly the power and fairness of equal rights. Interracial classrooms changed my life, and I've always been grateful for my experience. I congratulate those speaking out at the time and making changes. This world is better for it. I'm a different person because of the interracial justice I experienced. Thank you for sharing this important Kansas story.
I love that. Thank you so much.
That is from Carol Yoho. Good. Thank you, Carol. Yes, she lives what she preaches. So that's, right. I think we all do better when we live as one, know each other just as people.
And I want to make sure that the entire project is on the website. I put the URL on here, but I also put my email address on there. If you can't find it for some reason, we've been doing some changes with the website. If you can't find it, email me and I'll make sure that I reach back out to you with more information.
And where can we get your book?
You can, that URL will take you to the bookstore, but I'm hoping that's also going to get you to the project, but that's why I put my email address in there just in case.
Thank you. Thank you. Reverend Brown was a Black Wichita church leader, I believe. time dulled my memory, I was 14 years old. So I think this may be the same person.
Okay, so I'm not familiar with Reverend Black. Is it Reverend Brown or Reverend Black? So one of the two. Neither one, I'm not familiar, but that will give me some homework to go and research if there was a Reverend Brown or Black that was a part of that. I haven't heard of him, but I will definitely go back and look.
Well, there's, you certainly know a lot about it. So, but there are always things like with history, we know there's always things we can learn. And one person wrote in and said, if I remember right, the John Birch Society office was 2 blocks away from the Dockum building. Okay, another thing to ask.
Another homework.
Yeah. Oh, where in Wichita was the Dockum Drugstore?
So it's stated in the documentary, downtown Wichita was the place to be in Wichita, and the Dockum Drugstore was right in the heart of downtown. It was on Douglas, which is one of the main streets downtown. And I'm going to give you the exact address here.
It would be too much to hope that that was named for Frederick Douglass.
It was. So it is 104 South Broadway.
Okay.
Yeah.
The last comment is you'll be it's shared with you. It's the Hutchinson invitation. So
I'm looking forward to it.
I think we have many fans and a lot of work. People love to hear about this, and it's, you know, as we watch the news today and George Floyd and Black Lives Matter issues, I mean, the civil rights movement just continues, but it's gaining new supporters all the time.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? One of the things that I enjoy so much about being a part of this humanities project is traveling either physically or virtually throughout our state and having dialogue. So, I like the presentation part. I love to tell people the story, but then afterwards, I love these questions. I love to, and especially in person, when I get to, really have some back and forth conversation about, I think that is where we see change happen. When we get to know each other, when I get to hear the stories. I've heard so many stories. I was a part, I was there. I heard about this, or they were in other communities and they had similar stories, or they may not know anything about it. They may not have had the same experiences, but we get to hear people's experiences and their own stories, and that helps us to grow as people.
You're raising awareness. You're bringing a topic that's so important and getting people excited. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's the end of our questions tonight. It's been lovely having you. I wish you all the best. And it was a great program.
Well, thank you.
So please join us again, our viewers, on Friday, July 9th for a different type of program. In June of 2022, the Kansas Archaeology Training Program Field School will focus on the Brown v. Board of Education National Historic Site in Topeka. A plan for archaeological excavations at the site will be shared by our own Nikki Clairman, public outreach archaeologist for the Kansas Historical Society. She will also be the principal investigator on this project. The Brown v. Board site is the location of the Monroe Elementary School built in 1927. And you might not know that there was the first Monroe School was built there in 1874 and then replaced with the more modern building. Both were segregated schools for Black children until the 1954 court decision. The 2022 field school will explore the remains of structures that are buried on the property, using archaeology to help tell the story of the people who lived in the Monroe School neighborhood. Now, the field school relies heavily on volunteers. So if you're interested in doing some archaeology work, you will get training, and it's a really wonderful experience. So learn more about it, about the program next month, but also please watch our website for enrollment information. And our website is kshs.org. I hope you have enjoyed tonight's presentation as much as I have, and we'll log in again next month. From all of us at Museum After Hours.